So this is going to be an interactive class. We're going to go through several forms, including the purchase agreement, which is the current purchase agreement. Later this year, we're going to have Gov Hutchinson teaching us the new purchase agreement that's coming out that was delayed because of COVID. So what we're going to do here is Mark is going to be our fearless leader today, taking you through this contract. And he's going to start, and then every 15 minutes, we are going to stop and ask questions. So please put your questions in the chat box as they come up with where we're at. Once we get to that 15-minute mark, I will start with the questions in the chat. You're more than welcome to then raise your hand if you have a question as well. Make sure that you are taking notes. Like I said, if you've got the purchase agreement, take it out, mark it up. This is your time to learn. We have a nice group here, so and there's probably all different levels of experience with this RPA. So be patient with one another in case somebody asks something you may know, but hopefully everybody takes away some information. So again, keep yourself muted if you're not speaking, and we'll go ahead and get started. So Mark Miano is with KW Bay Area States, and he's going to take us through all of these contracts. So Mark, if you want to go ahead and get started.
All right, great. Welcome everyone. I just want to congratulate you on doing one of the most important and best things you can do to further or launch your real estate career. I started mentoring agents back in around 95, and I'd take an agent under my wing for a year. And at the end of the year, I'd always ask them, give me a handful of things that really helped you grow this year, really helped you learn and get confident. And inevitably, one of the things that every agent mentioned was that I would insist that they read the purchase agreement and the listing agreement every day for a month once they, got on board with me. Now our format would be shadowing, they'd follow me around and then we'd have some classroom time, sit in the conference room and I'd teach them things. But that was one of my bottom line requirements and it really served them well. So I'm going to ask you guys to do the same thing. I mean, unless you're buried with business, you've got time on your hands. So on a daily basis, pull out the purchase agreement and the listing agreement, read through it because it's going to dramatically increase your understanding of the overall process, the legal side of it. It builds your confidence. It does so many good things for you that you wouldn't even imagine. So let me throw that out there. How many people think they would be willing to at least agree to read the purchase agreement every day? Put your hand up. Okay. If you can't do that, you probably can't do all that well in this business because this is the keystone. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to see before we enter into any type of real estate transaction is a disclosure. I'm not going to read through these item by item. Again, I want you guys to read this. But the key ingredients are right here, and down here, all right? Seller and buyer agents have essentially the same duties to their clients and both parties in the transaction. Diligent exercise, honesty, and fair dealing in good faith. So there probably aren't any questions there, but again, read through this. And I encourage you to read through the civil code to really understand what we're doing. An agent means a person acting under the provisions of Title IX. What's Title IX? Look it up, okay? So spend a little time on this document when you have the next opportunity. Fair housing and discrimination is the next form that the people are, need to know about. Do they have disabilities? Are their civil rights being unfairly jeopardized? Here are the reasons and why we cannot discriminate for any of these reasons, okay? The only reason that we really discriminate against someone is if they're not financially qualified. If a person's not financially qualified, we shouldn't be bringing them along into a transaction, but any other reason is probably outside of the legal guidelines. So again, I'm not going to read through every line. You guys can all read. You obviously got licensed and are out there doing real estate in some form or another. Possible representation. You know, this came from a lawsuit years ago. Two agents from the same brokerage got together and talked about the offers they were waiting in the lobby to present. And, you know, somehow it got back to the buyers. So now we have to disclose it because we are such large companies, that there are multiple opportunities for the same brokerage, and in some cases, even the same agent, to be involved in the transaction in one or more forms. So please read through that. Wire fraud is a huge problem. You know, I had an experience with it personally a few years ago. A client called and said, hey, I just got this email, and you know, this was $1 million cash purchase, $1 million condo over on the beach, or very close to the beach, a block away. And at any rate, some hacker got into the emails, my client or mine, and sent a fraudulent email to my client saying, we've changed our bank account and send your money here instead of where we had told you originally. But he called me to check and see if that was legit. And of course it wasn't. So it happens. You know, these hackers are very sophisticated. Be very careful. The best advice you can give your client, especially a buyer client, is do not deviate. Once you've spoken to the escrow officer, do not deviate, do not change, do not do anything other than what you were told originally. If you get an email, ignore it. It's fraud. If you get a phone call, it's fraud. Okay? Only the original escrow officer should be giving you and your agent any instructions about wiring. That's real important. Does everybody get that? Cool. All right, here's the actual purchase agreement. So again, by reading this every day, you're going to understand that what's most important is who are we dealing with, who's representing them, and then like the Jerry Maguire movie, show me the money, okay? So the key here is to fill it out correctly. And C.A.R makes it so easy. You just click on the boxes, right? And they highlight, put in the names of the buyers, put in the property, put in the parcel number, attempt to address or fill in every box. Now let me throw one nugget out here. Close of escrow shall occur on, pick the date. When you say 30 days, for example, if we say 30 days from today, you wrote an offer today, I think it's going to fall on a weekend. And we can't close on a weekend because nobody's doing business that closes transactions, the recorder or the title company. They're not around on the weekends. So pick a date if you can, and just estimate based on the situation you're in, rather than putting in 30 days or 45 days, just a little bit cleaner. Confirmation of brokerage. We already talked about that in the agency disclosure, but it's reiterated here. Go to the MLS, fill out all this information. I get offers all the time with the license numbers missing, you know, and it's just, you know, be clean, be professional, fill in all the boxes. Finance terms, same thing. We got an offer the other day, 0 financing terms. I mean, you know, due diligence means filling in all the blanks, talking to your client's lender, finding out what type of loan they're going to do. And then when we get back to the kind of market where there are actually contingencies, because so much of the business is done today without contingencies, but you'll be able to put caps and limits into these loans to protect the client against rising interest rates. It's not an issue now, but I've been doing this since I was in college and started in the 80s, and interest rates were bouncing all over the place. My first year in the business, it was 17% first mortgage money, 22% for an equity line, if you can even wrap your mind around that. You know, we're looking at 3% now, and to me, it's like, that's free money compared to 17%. So fill in the blanks as much as you can, and let's just take a break right there, Jody, if you could. Are there any questions on page 1? Anybody have their hand in the air? I see. Marlene.
Marlena, it looks like. Marlena?
Oh, I'm sorry, that must have been from earlier.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
raise your
You were
hand.
raising your hand, you to read it. Got it.
You can read the contract.
Sorry about that.
Atta
Nope,
girl.
nope, totally fine. We got two hands up. First, we got Grace.
Grace, go ahead, please.
I just want to reiterate what you said about filling in all the blanks. If your blanks, if you have,
I lost you there,
fill-
Grace.
you really, I'm sorry. If
lost
you
you
have
for a
blank,
second.
if you have blanks in the in your contract, you almost don't have a completed contract. If you don't fill out the financial part of it, you are not protecting your buyer, especially with an interest rate. And as you said, right now, it's not a big deal. But if you have if they're qualified for a 2.5 interest rate and it goes up to 4, and now they can't qualify, and you don't have that in there, they have to figure out a way. Because,
Yeah, we got a problem.
yeah, there is a problem there because there's no protection for your buyer if you don't have an interest rate in there.
Awesome. Thanks, Grace. Excellent point. Yen?
Yeah, can you go explain in details on the increased deposit? How does all that works and be?
Well, yeah, I will explain how that works. You really shouldn't have to deal with that. If an agent is properly representing a buyer, they're going to understand that what a seller wants to see and a listing agent wants to see is a full 3%. Why 3%? What's magic about that? Okay. What's magic about that is the maximum amount under the law that a seller can retain from a buyer when you're dealing in 1 to 4 units of residential property in the state of California. Everybody understand what I said there? 3% is the maximum amount a seller can attach. If a seller, has recourse, legal action against a buyer, they can't go after the buyer's possessions. The seller can't go after their car and like other lawsuits where you can wipe a person out. The law says 3% is the maximum. So you should have 3% there if you want to satisfy a seller's and listing agent's concerns. All right. Now, this is left over from back in the day. When I first started in business, people would put $500, $1,000. Of course, the houses that are selling for $1.1 million now were only $52,000 when I started. But the point is, people would just put chump change in as a deposit because things didn't move at the pace they do today. And then later on, you'd have to have an increased deposit because a good listing agent would say, hey, thanks for the $1,000, but we want a full 3%. So put 30,000 down for this $1 million house and bring in another 29,000. And that's where the increased deposit comes in. Now, the key here is if you do accept a low deposit and then agree to do an increased deposit, the buyer has it filled out, maybe they're going to sell some stock or something. When we get into that kind of market, be sure that you attach the form RID. You see what it says here, Leanne? C.A.R form RID. Here's the problem. Without that form, the increased deposit is considered down payment money. It's not automatically considered deposit unless you have this form instructing the title company to call the new money coming in deposit. And what's the problem there? Problem there is if it's not called deposit, if it's called down payment, then if an issue occurs and your seller wins a lawsuit or wins an arbitration, more likely, they go after the deposit, right? Well, when they get to the deposit, they're going to find out it's only $1,000 because the RID form wasn't included. So be very careful if you're going to do an increased deposit and accept an offer like that. be sure that the buyer comes back and sellers sign an RID,
Mhm.
increasing the deposit. So the title company knows that that money becomes deposit money, not just additional down payment or balance of down payment money. Is that clear?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Am I correct to say that if you don't have an RID, that they can actually sue you for the balance of that, the
Oh,
remaining?
yeah, if your seller won an arbitration and they went to the, old Mother Hubbard went to the cupboard and the cupboard was bare, I mean, where do you think the seller's going to turn to get the $30,000 that they just won? They're going to turn to the agent who failed to use proper diligence, who failed to fill out the correct form, who failed to identify the increased deposit as deposit. And unfortunately, it was classified as down payment money instead. So yeah, they'll come after the listing agent and his company or her. Okay, so you're correct, Grace. Yeah, they'll turn on you, most likely. All right, moving ahead to page 2. Verification of down payment. Again, because we're in this non-contingent kind of market, we usually see all of these boxes checked. Verification is already attached. Letter attached for the loan application. We see a lot of no loan contingency offers, which automatically, when I click on this, it automatically rules out this. If I try to put it 4 days in here for loan contingency, if I check no, it's going to override that technically. So don't put a date in there. Make sure that that's 0 if you're going to check no loan contingency. And then you want to attach the contingency removal form, and we'll get to that later. But loan terms, loan application within 3 days, loan contingency, and appraisal contingency. If you do have one, fill it out. Because, for a lot of loans, we do have contingencies still. When you're the only offer on the table, the seller is more likely to work with some degree of small contingencies versus asking that you have 0 contingencies. And by the way, 0 contingencies are not really such a great deal in some circumstances. Back in the day when we first started doing 0 contingencies, our attorneys used to say, hey, you know what, when you get a non-contingent offer, push back on the buyer and say, we're going to give you 2 or 3 days to study everything. Because all the paperwork wasn't in the file back in those days. Now we get all the inspections up front, all the HOA docs up front, everything's done up front. So at least the seller is providing the buyer with all pertinent information up front, making non-contingent offers possible. But you can see there could be a problem if the buyer didn't have all the information, but they came in non-contingent. There could be a contingency created by new information hitting the table anyway. And we'll get to that coming up too. Buyer stated financing, again, sellers relying on the buyer. So when the buyer says they're qualified for the loan and they turn in the loan approval letter, you as the buyer's agent, you have to verify that this is all accurate information. You have to talk to the lender, make sure the lender did their job well, because there's really good lenders and there's brand new lenders. And if your buyer's with a brand new lender, they might make a mistake in processing the loan or representing that the buyer's fully qualified. So you've got to double check their work in cases like that. Sale of the buyer's property. Well, that's not happening around here, but back, when the market was slow and when we had the downturns, many people would check this box and say, as soon as we get our house sold, we'll buy yours. And if it makes sense, if the buyer's property is well priced for the market, you have to make that call as a listing agent and explain to your seller, they've got it priced so that it's likely to sell. This makes sense to go forward with this type of contingency. When we get into that kind of market, you'll be doing that kind of work. But currently, there's no sellers out there that are going to wait for you to sell your property when we're having multiple offers from cash buyers and buyers that have nothing to sell, right? Okay.
Mark, got a question on contingencies if we can.
Yeah, go ahead. Great, Jody. Thank you.
Yep. If it's a fully non-contingent offer, do you need to put a 0 in all the boxes that have a certain amount of days noted?
It's a good idea. Yes, because it makes it perfectly clear. Now you're going to attach a form that says we're removing all contingencies. That's the third option. There's 3 options on the contingency removal form. You can remove a contingency or a couple of contingencies. In B, you can remove all but a certain contingency or 2. And then in C, item C, you're removing all contingencies. But again, fill in all the blanks you can so there's no question. The guy that, I used to go to all his classes, Guy Berry, rest his soul, he's passed away, but one of the greatest contract teachers I've ever seen. He would say, if a third party neutral individual can't walk in off the street and read your contract and understand it exactly the way you meant it, you didn't write it well enough. So I've always kept that in mind. If a third party's coming in off the street and they see a bunch of blanks, they might say, well, wait a minute, this isn't filled out. So I don't know what that means. So let's put in 0 days. Okay. Is it legally binding without the 0 in there? Yeah, of course. But again, our attempt is to be as clean and as concise and clear as possible. So fill it out if you can. All right. Sometimes the form kicks you out when you fill in certain things like all cash on the first page. I think if you check one of these boxes, it erases. There you go. It kind of erases everything in the loan section. So if you had an interest rate here, 99%, I think if you check all cash, yeah, see, it erases it. So there's a few things that get erased automatically, but not all. Any other questions there, Jody?
Nope, that's all I see.
Awesome. Thank
Oh,
you.
and actually,
I had my hand
sorry,
raised.
Grace has her hand up.
Okay, Grace, go for it.
Sorry. With all cash, with all cash, make sure that you have with the offer, whether you're writing it or receiving it, the amount of money that they have it, or how they're getting it. I have seen in the past, Mark, probably you have too, is all cash, and then they're selling a property or they're refinancing a property to get the money, and there's an issue. So you need to make sure all the paperwork with the offer showing where the money is coming from.
Right. When you're representing a seller, Grace is exactly right. You want to see proof of funds, and you want to make sure it's in a bank account, not a stock account, not a Fidelity account. If it hasn't already been converted to cash, you have to counter the buyer and the buyer's agent saying, sell the stock right now, because in many cases in the past, as Grace has pointed out, especially in the .com, people would have, $250,000, $300,000 stock value, and then by the time we went to close, it was worth 50,000. Took a huge hit. So, and that can happen today. Stocks fluctuate. You might come up short. So get the money converted to cash. Ask to see it in the form of proof of funds, and make sure it's already converted to cash. Good point. Thank you, Grace. Okay, let's see. So there we are on page 2. We're going to move on to page 3 here. This really talks about compliance and who's paying what. Now, when you tell your client you pay for your lender's title and escrow fees, the seller pays for the seller's, the big portion of title and escrow, keep in mind that that only pertains to Santa Clara County or any other county that works the same way we do here. This is not set up by law. This is only what's customary here. In Santa Clara County, the seller pays these fees, okay? So what the deal is, when you go to Santa Cruz County, buyer and seller, the custom is there, they split it 50-50. When you get to Alameda County or San Mateo County, those are buyer pay counties. The buyer pays the title and escrow fees. So if you're going to represent a buyer in another county, you have to make a phone call to your escrow officer here or there and just say what's customary here, because we get this all the time. Well, not all the time, but oftentimes I get an offer from a Santa Cruz agent, got one not too long ago on a house in Los Gatos here that we have currently in escrow. And he said 50-50 on the fees. We said, fine. The seller was prepared to pay all the title and escrow fees because that's what we do here in Santa Clara County. So protect your buyer that way, understand the lay of the land if you're going out of our county, and find out who customarily pays these fees. Now, they're fully negotiable. When we're in hotly contested multiple offers, what I've asked my buyers to do in order to win the property is agree to pay the seller's closing costs, because everybody knows how to compete on price. It's always about, yeah, the highest price. But is it? No. At the end of the day, what really matters to a seller is how much they're going to net. So you can pick up a lot of fees without increasing the price, and you can put more money in the seller's pocket if you're a buyer's agent and a buyer by agreeing to pay these costs. And there's another added plus to the buyer, and that is when they bring this to their CPA, some of these fees that they may have agreed to pay for the seller can be tax deductible. So it actually, if they say, we'll give you $5,000 in closing costs, maybe it's reduced by 30 or 40% after tax. So always have your buyers, consider that and talk to their accountants about what they can write off as a cost of doing business. So that's it for closing costs there. Next thing we're talking about is, and this is key, you've really got to explain to your buyers and to sellers, when you're doing a listing, that what's included in the sale is all existing. And this is to tell sellers, don't show us this beautiful kitchen full of appliances and beautiful washer and dryer, top of the line stuff. And then when we show up, it's all been pulled out and replaced by substandard stuff. Sellers can't do that, okay? It says right here, what's existing, when we get the offer accepted, when we look at the property, that's what's supposed to be there at close. Everybody understands that. So again, read through this stuff, all existing. That's why it's in big, bold letters. To tell the buyer, if it wasn't existing there, it's not going to be there at close. And to tell the seller, if it's existing now, it better be there when we close. And they specify that this stuff is attached to the property, right? Fixtures and fittings that are attached. Now you may say, okay, what about flat screens? Well, that's all down here, all right? And we'll get to that in a minute. But these are the things that are included. Now you may have a seller that wants to hold things back. So seller represents, items excluded. There's a passage here for that. Family heirloom, a chandelier that, it's too complicated to take it down prior to the listing. But what we want to do then is itemize it here, either in a counter offer or tell the buyer to write it in on the offer that we're excluding this family heirloom chandelier, and that, the buyer has to go get a replacement after close of escrow. All right. Now this talks about the brackets that always come into play. It talks about items that are automatically excluded. The following items are excluded. Audio and video components such as flat screen TVs. They're not included automatically. Now many sellers leave them. I get it. It's kind of cheaper to buy a new one. They're making the improvements so fast nowadays. Many sellers just leave them and say, oh, we'll get a new one. It wouldn't fit in the new place anyway. But just so you know, they're not included. So advise your buyers that they're not automatically going to get flat screens that are mounted. What they may end up with are just brackets when they show up at closing, okay? Or the brackets may be removed and there may be patched holes in the walls. So let your buyers know that this is a potential, and talk to the listing agent in advance of writing the offer and just say, what's the seller's intention? And then you'll know how to fill this out, whether to check the brackets will be removed and holes and other damage repaired but not painted, or will the brackets just be sitting there over the fireplace and then we go get our own TV to attach to the bracket. All right, closing in possession, fill this out accurately. If the buyer, if you check does not intend, don't play around with the banks. If the buyer does not intend to occupy the property, check this. Yeah, they're going to get charged a higher interest rate because landlords are charged a higher rate than an owner occupied buyer is charged. But tell the truth. Why? Because banks are federally chartered institutions. Did everybody get that? Federally chartered institutions. So that means when you deceive a bank or defraud a bank and get caught, you've committed a federal offense. So there's huge penalties, including jail time for federal offenses. So if you've got a buyer that's kind of leaning toward deceiving a lender, just tell them straight up, you don't want to go down that road. You could wind up in jail, literally. All right. So check these boxes, and then seller occupied. Now this says 6 p.m. Escrows typically close around noon. We get verification by 1 or 2 p.m. from the main branch, the title company, and so forth. So you can bump this up. I always like to move this up to about 3 o'clock so that there's a little bit of time left, daylight, especially if it's in the winter months, to get over there, take a look at the property, hand over the keys, have a little fun little ceremony with your client. At 6 p.m., everybody's thinking about dinner and so forth, and it kind of takes all the fun out of it. So that's just my own personal preference. You can do it any way you want. And then you would go on to talk about seller and remaining in possession if there is going to be a possession date after close of escrow. Okay, so let's see if there's any questions on that page.
I got 2 questions, and I think they're from the previous one.
Oh, from
The
the
first
previous
one,
page
I think so. The
Okay.
first one said, I've noticed in the financial area that the number of points will not take a 0, which means the rate can be higher and be brought down.
You're saying the points not rate, adjustable rate, points not to exceed, it won't take a 0. Right. And that's good because you should put something in there. You should put, a 1/4 of a point not to exceed. In this market, rates shouldn't bounce around very much, and they don't. So I always limit this to 1/2 a point if we're in kind of an active market, 0.5 points not to exceed. It just protects your buyer against the lender coming back and saying, I've still got that 3% rate, but it's only available at a full point. Whereas 30 days ago, that 3% rate was there for 0 points or 1/4 of a point. So put something in there. This is a ceiling. This is a not to exceed. See, it says not to exceed. So this protects your buyer when they have a loan contingency. It protects them. If you go in with 0 loan contingency, well, they're rolling the dice. Your buyer's not protected by this paragraph. Does that answer that question?
I think so.
Okay.
Connie?
Sorry, I have a question too. This is Leticia.
Hi, Leticia.
Hello. So going back to page 3 at the top, number 2I, did you go over that yet? Or did you go over that at all?
Page 3,
Top-
2I.
The government,
No, we
yeah.
can talk about that. Yeah, again, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So in certain counties, now we don't, this is not applicable in Santa Clara County here, okay? We don't have a minimum mandatory government inspection required, but there are HOA inspections with certain HOAs that are required, but it's not a government one. So you're going to check a different box on that. And we don't have compliance with retrofits here in Santa Clara County. They tried to pass one years ago where all the fireplaces at point of sale had to be replaced with gas that couldn't wood burn, and our industry lobbied against it. And they said, look, that's a great idea to convert all wood burning fireplaces to gas, but just make it a law. don't just pick on sellers. You know, they're already spending a lot of money to sell their house, what with transfer tax and real estate fees and everything. So we said, you know, if you want to make a law, but make it applicable to everybody. Don't just target these sellers because they're already getting hit with a lot of fees. So
Yeah.
you go to Monterey County or Santa Cruz County, there they do have minimum government inspections. You go up to, we just closed one in Hillsborough. They have sewer lateral inspections required. Okay, so you have to have somebody come out, a licensed plumber with a camera, take pictures. The pictures have to be, the thumb drive has to be sent to the county and the city, and they have to sign off that the sewer lateral is either, you know, it either passes or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then you got to get a bid and get it repaired. So that's where you would check these boxes. Who do you want to pay for those? Is it going to be the buyer or is it going to be the seller in counties and areas where there are minimum requirements for reports and inspections or retrofits? In Monterey County, you have to make sure you're below a 1.5 gallon per minute shower heads, faucets, toilets, everything like that. You either have to retrofit or prove that they're already there by getting them tested.
Do any of those raise any flags for like lender-wise or anything like that?
No, not if the lender is familiar with that county. No, the only thing that's going to raise a red flag for a lender is where buyer and seller agree to do certain inspections and do repairs. When a lender sees that, then they want to get in, and then, you know, sometimes the lender can screw up your transaction by asking for things to be done that neither party really wanted done. Either way, repairs.
Okay.
So what we typically do is, you know, in today's world, rather than get the banks involved, buyer and seller just look at what repairs need to be done. And then if buyer and seller agree to say $5,000 in repairs, the seller will give the buyer a credit in escrow toward their non-recurring closing costs, making it much cleaner because you don't say a word about repairs or inspections. You just say it's a credit toward non-recurring closing costs. And the banks are fine with that up to a certain limit. So that brings me to another point. When you are negotiating as a seller to give money back to the buyer, the first call you have to make is to the buyer's lender and just say, if we give your buyer client $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, whatever it is in non-recurring closing costs, will they be able to spend all that money? What's the limit your bank has set, and so on. So always check with the lender first before you do anything in the way of credits to a buyer. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. And thank you for explaining that. That's helpful.
Okay, good.
One more question, and you've kind of got it towards the top of your page there. Page 2, section 7. So it looks like all the inspections there. If all the reports are included in the disclosure packet, do you still need to fill that section out?
What I like to do is I like to just fill out section 1 of paragraph 7A. Section 1 says seller shall pay for a hazard. Now, why do I do that? And then I include, you know, tax, environmental, and if there's other, then I would fill that in. That's a state law, okay? That's a law. So it's nice and clean. It makes everybody aware, you know, sellers have no choice but to provide that report. So putting it on the seller is okay. Now, one thing you could do is you could say buyer, if you're in multiple offers, you could say buyer to pay for it. And, you know, you put a little more money in the seller's pocket, but normally the seller pays for that report. And then I wouldn't fill out any of these other reports again, because it shines a light on inspection reports in the lender's eyes. And we just don't want lenders dictating what's to be repaired and what, because let's say, for example, you've got a condo or a townhouse, it's attached to 7 other units. There's 8 in a row, right? You can't tent that unit that's in the middle unless you tent the whole building. And if you can't tent it, you can't certify that it's 100% pest free. And the banks will come back and they say, we want it certified 100% free of termites. You can't do it. There's no way to do it unless all the other 7 families, and they're not going to do it, agree to move out for 3 days and pack up all their stuff. And that's just not going to happen, folks. So leave these sections blank, 2 and 3. Just check this box. And again, any repairs, just call it a credit for non-recurring closing costs. That's the language that banks are okay with. And it gives the buyer the money they need to make the repair that the seller's willing to give them. And it's nice.
Mark,
and
Mark,
Yeah.
just an FYI, if you do have a condo and you have to, of course, do the whole building, not just the one unit, you, the seller, or whoever is agreeing to pay for it, has to pay for the accommodations
housing.
for the other tenants to live wherever they are going.
Yeah, and if you can find a situation where 7 other families are going to help your seller out by moving out and doing all that stuff, you might as well go buy a lottery ticket, because your luck is incredible. And that ain't going to happen. But your point is well taken. Yeah, it's not just a matter of paying for the tenting of the whole building. You have to pay for all the moving and the accommodations. And I mean, we're talking $100,000 or whatever. It's some crazy number. So don't fill these sections out. Just let buyer and seller work out any credits in escrow as a non-recurring closing cost. And it also protects your seller to do it that way, because in many cases, and this isn't great for your buyers, but explain to your buyers, here's the situation. Sellers, the report says $5,000 for termite damage, hypothetically. Seller's okay with giving them $5,000 for it. But if you're representing a buyer, just say, hey, listen, by the way, that's based on what the termite guys can actually see. Okay, once they get into that wall, or once they get underneath the tub or where the shower, there could be more damage, and they will charge you more money. So just be prepared for that. This $5,000 could go up by $1,000 or $2,000, depending on whatever was called out in the termite report. Just advise your buyers that this is based on what they can see. Now, for the sellers, that's a great deal, because the sellers know $5,000 and we're done. Seller doesn't have to worry about those increased costs. So it's really good for a seller, and it's okay for the buyer. At least they're paying for some of it. We're in a market where sellers aren't paying for anything. So if you do get a seller to pay for something, that's pretty good. All right, everybody understand that it could snowball into something else once they get inside the wall or inside the floors. Okay. Jody, any other questions?
Nope,
Okay.
I don't see anything else.
All right, good. So let's roll. Let's see, we talked about compliance. We talked about fees here. We talked about brackets and possession. Seller remaining in possession. Okay, here's something just came up. One of my jobs, besides selling real estate here at the office, I'm what's known as the risk manager or the deal doctor. So when people get into, strategy situations, they call me up and they say, we're thinking of doing this, or writing the offer this way, or I think we have a problem. How do we address it? One of the things that came up recently was this SIP. All right. So our client was the buyer. Seller filled out the SIP. And if you read the SIP carefully, in the first paragraph, it says whatever number of days the seller wants to stay, they pay for upfront, deposit the money in escrow, and there's no refunds for moving out early. I'm going to say that again. There are no refunds for moving out early. So this seller, our client was the buyer. This seller wanted 30 days. So our buyer said, okay, yeah, 30 days. The seller, it was out of the area, not quite as hot as the valley. It was over the hill at the beach. And they wanted to stay for 30 days, and they agreed to pay the buyer's principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. As all you guys know, that's called PITI. So they agreed to pay the buyer the full 30 days, left it in escrow, and then when they went to, line up their movers, they found an early slot and they were only there 10 days. They wanted 20 days worth back. And, our agent told them, no, it says right here, you don't get it back. So guess who ended up paying for 20 days worth of rent? The listing agent paid the client because the listing agent didn't explain to the seller that if you move out early, you don't get your money back. And they were really hot about that because that was their intent all along, that they've been telling their listing agent, if we get a chance to move out earlier than 30 days, we want to, but we want to get a credit back for the money. And listing agent was kind of going along with it saying, yeah, you can do that. Well, the listing agent failed to read the SIP form carefully and completely missed the line that says there's no refunds. So just a word of caution, you guys. This is why I want you to read the contract every day for a month, because you're going to be better prepared than 90% of the agents out there that have been doing this for years, because they don't read the contract either. They just fill in the blanks. And I have to read this thing once a week myself, just because of the job I have. And I forget half the stuff that's in it. I'll be honest with you. We're all busy. We're doing a million things at once. Life has a lot of distractions, and you forget over a few months or weeks what's in the purchase agreement. So read it and read it often. Read it every day for a month, and you'll be super well prepared to have a really nice long career in real estate. All righty. So the seller can remain. Now, this is a suggestion here. This isn't necessarily in concrete. Can you go for 30 days with an SIP? Yeah, they recommend that it be less than 30, but use the correct form. If you're going to be there for 2 months or 45 days, use the RLAS. And if you're going to be there 30 days or less, 29 days or less, use the SIP. One form, creates a different type of tenancy, addresses a different type of tenancy. And you can get into that with your attorneys and so forth. There's all kinds of tenancies. When we go to a hotel, that's technically a type of tenancy, but we're really getting a license or permission to stay, but we don't get tenants' rights at a hotel. Now, when you move into, when you stay rather, in your own home as a seller after close of escrow, you literally get tenants' rights, okay? So have your attorney explain all the differences there, because it's a very complicated and involved process. Karin, you had a question?
Yeah, I do. This is back to reading the agreements every day, the contracts, reading them every day. Where is the best place to go? Like if I'm through this and I have a question on one paragraph, where's the best place to go to get clarification, at a glance?
In C.A.R, in this app that I'm in, there's a Q&A mode, okay? And all you have to do is, I've not used it personally, but I've sat through other contract classes and watched the instructor, it's over here or something like this, look up field manager. I'm not exactly sure what box he was checking, but you can call C.A.R, use your membership, and ask them, if I'm in here and I want to study it, where do I click in the website to highlight certain sections, and then over here in the margin, it explains them in greater detail. Hope that's helpful.
All right. Yeah, great. Thanks.
Yeah, I wish I knew more about it, but I'm kind of behind the times with as much computer technology as we have. I know the contract really well, but all the computer apps, I'm not 100% up to speed, but I know they exist. Okay, moving along. Tenant to remain in possession would apply if there was a renter in the property. And then again, hold the form down and find out what it says and read it before you use it if you're going to leave a tenant in possession as a listing agent, or if you're a buyer's agent and you're accepting a tenant in possession. So at close of escrow, seller assigns to buyer any assignable rights. So again, read all this stuff and understand what it means. Paragraph 10 talks about all the statutory disclosures. We already talked about the natural hazard. That's required by law per state of California, that sellers give all this information to the buyers. So they buy a report for $130, and that explains to the buyer in great detail what they need to know about liquefaction, flood inundation, environmental hazards, military ordnance, flight paths of airports, all kinds of things are spelled out, how the taxes that are collected, the property taxes, how they're spent, all that's in those reports. So we talked about that. Withholding taxes is really important if you've got a seller. All right. Most of the time, there's no withholding because we sell residential properties that people actually live in, and they're citizens of the state and the US. But in cases where you don't have a US or a state citizen, there are withholding taxes. So get with your title company right off the bat if your client is not a citizen of both California and the US. There's green card holders, there are people that have dual citizenship, and so on and so forth. Check with your title company as soon as you take the listing and find out what your seller is going to be up against. Because interestingly enough, the way the law is written, it's up to the buyer to make sure that the taxes get paid. Now, how's the buyer supposed to know? Well, that's why we get the title company involved, and the title company will either get a FERPTA or a QS, a qualified substitute form, which makes the declaration to the buyer that we've checked out the seller and that we've either withheld taxes appropriately or this seller is not required to have any taxes withheld. Megan's Law, this is a real slippery slope. I recommend you don't go to the site, you don't look it up for a specific listing, because once you have information that's a material fact, we're obligated as agents to share that information. But what we don't know, we don't have to share. So when they first built this Megan's Law database, I mean, we all opened it up and looked at it, and my God, there are convicted sex offenders everywhere, everywhere. On your block, the next block over, your parents' neighborhood, your sister's neighborhood, I mean, they're literally everywhere. Now, it doesn't say what they got, convicted of, whether this is a real nasty individual or just somebody that, got drunk and passed out with their pants off or something, at a frat party. Either way, steer clear of this, but just tell your client, if you're concerned about these issues, you go to the website and you look at it. You contact the police department, get all the information you want to know and need to know about criminals, Megan's Law, anything along those lines. But I caution you, don't go there yourself, because then you've got to disclose all that stuff. And some of it may be information you didn't want to know about. Okay? Hope you understand that. Just be careful. Notice regarding gas, this came from the whole San Bruno pipeline explosion with PG&E and everything. We need to identify this information and tell your client, look at this website, look at the natural hazard disclosure, and satisfy yourself that, your house is not on a pipeline if you don't want to be on a pipeline. And then we'll talk about condominiums here. Seller has X days, you should get all this stuff up front if you're a listing agent. And the buyer, you should be asking for all this stuff up front because it takes a while to get this stuff. If you have a 5-day contingency removal and the HOA can't get stuff out for 2 weeks, you got a problem. So seller agents, listing agents, get this stuff done up front. Buyer's agents, make sure you have it all, because if you don't, you may want to write a non-contingent offer with just one contingency left over for HOA docs if it's not complete. Any questions on page 4?
I don't see any in chat, and I don't see anybody with their hand up.
All right. let's move along. So HOAs, as I started to say, you know, they're backed up, especially with COVID. You know, it was almost impossible to get anything within 2 or 3 weeks last year from these title company and home owner association companies, management companies. So get all that stuff up front if you're a listing agent and ask for it up front if you're the buyer's agent. Condition of the property. This is kind of a key paragraph here, because unless otherwise agreed in writing, the property is sold in its as is present physical condition as of the date of acceptance. And it's subject to buyer's investigation rights, okay? So if you're representing a buyer or a seller, what you have to understand is as is needs to be defined. Karen, you had a question?
I did. I had a question on the HOA documents.
Yeah.
They are ginormous when you get that whole pack, and it's. Do you recommend having a professional HOA person do that?
Yeah, I have. I use Jackie Berry, Bery, and Alain, Alain Dussault. They used to work together. I think Alain's on his own now. But if you're
Yes.
representing a buyer, let me get the correct spelling of their names, and then you can Google them.
And we had Jackie Berry earlier this year, and we are going to be scheduling her to come back. She does live in Texas now, but she is still
It's all in the database. Yeah.
doing everything. Yeah. And then I believe Alain worked under her for a long time. So it's also very good.
Yeah, when you're representing a buyer, if you fail to contact Jackie Berry or you fail to contact Alain Dussault for their very detailed analysis of the HOA, it's the same as failing to get a home inspection on a property or a termite inspection. You are just as negligent as the buyer's representative as if you didn't get any inspections done on the property. Because what happens is a buyer that is buying a condo is literally buying into and becoming a member of a nonprofit organization. And that organization needs to be running well. It needs to be well managed. It needs to be fully funded. And if it's not, that information needs to be shared in great detail with the buyer so they can make a fully informed decision about what they're getting into here. Okay? Everybody get that? You are signing up to basically become a member of a business. And if that business goes down, you're going down with it. So you really owe it legally and ethically to your buyer to tell them, go spend the $450, or if they're unwilling to, in some cases, I do it myself, I'll write the check and tell them, if you don't close escrow, you owe me the money, but I'm going to gift it to you in the short term because there's so much important information. Are the newsletters current? You got to read those newsletters because that's where they talk about all the break-ins and the vandals throwing the lawn furniture into the pool and the graffiti and the cars and all that stuff and the speeding and whatever. That all comes up in those newsletters, the minutes of the meetings, people that bring legitimate complaints to the HOA. Those are all spelled out. Your client needs to know about that stuff. Go ahead, Karen. Or your hands up from before.
Oh, no. Yeah. Okay. One more question. So if there's a certain community and you get Jackie Berry or Alain to do one of these analysis of the HOA docs, how, I don't know how to say this. How long is that good for? So if there's, if you get the report today on a certain community, can you use that report for another client in 3 weeks?
Yeah, 3 weeks, you would probably be fine. But if it's more than 30 days, then you're going to probably be missing one of the newsletters because they typically come out monthly. There may be an audit that took place. So you'd have to go back to Alon and Jackie and just say, hey, can you refresh the package at a discounted fee or something like that? You might be able to work something out with them. Leanne, you had a question?
I have a question. Where do I, oh, here it is.
Yes, I do. So what I don't understand is why are we taking the reviewing of the HOA documents upon ourselves to understand? Isn't this documents belongs to the buyers and the seller? This is seller disclosing the document, the HOA, or the HOA is disclosing it to the buyers. I mean, that's what I don't understand. Why are we taking this on as ourselves? We're responsible, understanding the HOA rules and regulations and passing it on to the buyers.
Yeah, if you don't hire Jackie and you don't explain to the buyer what's going on, who do you think is going to get sued when there's a problem?
But isn't that the buyer's responsibility to understand this is the HOA rules and regulation? If they agree to buying it, these are the rules under, this HOA rules on this property. This is what they need to follow and understand. For instance, as in rental, the size of the dog, the type of floorings to put in, those things like that. That's what I'm trying to understand. Why are we requiring the outside services to review these documents? When these are the buyers, we can provide the information and let the buyer know, hey, if you need to understand in more detail, I would suggest you hire these two people to help you understand, these documents. But I feel that if we do it ourselves by paying for it or trying to understand it, we're putting liability on us versus it should be between buyers and seller and the HOA association.
Well, you're walking a fine line there, Lean, because what happens is if you fail to tell your buyer to go get one of these experts to explain and break down all these documents, you haven't done your job. And if a problem occurs, you'll get sued. That's what's happened in the past. We know that for a fact. So you can argue all day long that, hey, it wasn't my job, it's between buyers and sellers, but the agent will get sued if a problem occurs because that's what happens in the real world. So you have a valid argument, but it's not going to insulate you from, getting $20,000 check for your deductible when your E&O insurance calls and says you're being sued because the buyer's claiming nobody told them they could.
And hire these people, let them do
Okay,
it.
that's just a fact of life. So roll up your sleeves. Look in there if they've got a dog. Look if they want to put hardwood floors on the second floor. Read through these HOA documents. What you're going to find is there are a lot of similarities from one to the next. Because the DRE approves all of them and they kind of have a template, if you will, for a lot of these documents. But they're not all the same. I just sold a townhouse. The lady wanted to know, are there rental restrictions? I looked in there and I said, no. It says clearly here, no rental restrictions for any reason. Other subdivisions absolutely have rental restrictions. One subdivision says 17% rental units, the rest have to be owner occupied. Others say up to 50%. You have to give buyers help or they're going to turn on you when they have a problem and they're going to come back and sue you. And you're going to have to write a check for a deductible that in many cases doesn't even cover the amount of the commission you got. It's a nightmare for you because you're being sued. So if you do everything possible to help the seller be educated and the buyer be educated about the HOA and the condition, you're going to be in much better shape when you have all this documentation and a report from Jackie Berry that laid everything out and the buyer signed off on it. How are they possibly going to say nobody told me about X, Y, or Z when you've gone to all that trouble? They wouldn't have a very good argument, and your chances of being drawn into litigation go way, way down.
Mark, I have a comment, and then Margaret had her hand up.
Okay,
So I sit on the CBVA meeting a lot, and one of the things I've heard with HOA docs is if you're selling a property, you also want to know what's in those HOA docs and read the meeting minutes, because what you also don't, you want your seller to be aware if there's a special assessment coming, because what you also don't want to happen is for the buyer to get it and come back to you and say, hey, they're going to put new windows in and they don't have enough money in their reserves to pay for all of these things. And you want your seller to be aware that when they're selling this house, that there could be a $10,000 or $100,000 assessment coming. So I think it's good as the buyer. This is something I've learned. I'm not an agent, but I've learned that as a seller agent, you also want to understand so that you don't get surprises from the buyer's agent coming and saying, well, didn't you know that there's a $10,000 assessment coming and they don't have enough money in reserves to pay it? And once the buyer buys that property, that's now their assessment. So that's just something that I've learned, that it's a good idea that you understand what's in those documents as well.
yeah, that's exactly supporting what I said earlier about reading the minutes and reading the newsletters, because you learn so much.
Mhm.
Property recently here in San Jose that was under litigation. So I read through it, I found it. Even our seller was on the board and she didn't know about it. I called him up. I said, did you know your litigation? Oh, yeah, I heard something about it, but no, yeah. So they're suing the builder, right? And it makes it real difficult to get a loan when a property's in litigation for construction defects.
Yep.
So I contacted 2 other agents that had listings. I knew both of them personally. I said, do you know anything about this? And they go, what? Lawsuit? No. So I gave them a heads up and they disclosed it and they were able to close their escrows. Everybody got them closed. But can you imagine what would have happened had the buyers not been told and then moved in and then found out there's litigation and potentially thousands of dollars per unit in fees going to be assessed to cover the either legal fees that the HOA is going to sustain or the damage that the builder is refusing to do. Who's going to pay for that? It's coming out of reserves. So they're going to have to reassess. So I hear what you're saying, Leanne, but I'm not going to follow your path. No way. You're going to get in trouble doing that eventually.
So Margaret's got a question and then Grace.
Okay.
Yes, I've often had sellers say, oh, I've got all the HOA docs. Yes, I've got all the minutes. I've got all the information. Why do I have to pay for, the HOA to give us docs? And I always tell them that, well, it's really not as official. So we really need to give them the official copy. Is that correct? Or is there another way?
Yeah, I would agree 100% because the onus is on the HOA, not the seller, if you do it the right way. The right way is to contact the HOA. They fill out a cert, which says they answer a whole bunch of questions for the bank about, are we in litigation? How many units are rental occupied? The seller doesn't have that information. Only the HOA and the management company do. And only the HOA and the management company include a cover sheet that itemizes all the documents that are being given. The seller, if they leave out one document and that's the one that talked about the lawsuit or talked about the break-ins or talked about the speeding car that ran over the pedestrian, your sellers are screwed. They forgot one document and that contained a very inflammatory issue. Your seller's going to get sued and you along with them. That's just how these litigations work. And you as the agent did nothing wrong, but because you have E&O insurance, you will absolutely be drawn into it. You will have to pay your deductible, which is 10 or 20,000, depending on your policy, which, barely covers the cost of covers the commission that you earned on that $1 million condo. You're going to break even. You just did all that work for free after you pay your deductible potentially. So yeah, just do it the right way, guys. Too many agents have made the mistake of doing it other ways and ended up paying for it. That's why we're telling you this. It's just not because it's a good idea. It's because so many agents have been sued.
Yeah. Grace, you have your hand up?
Yes. Also, even though you get all the documents from the HOA, they sometimes leave out things. And if you're having it read by Alon or by Jackie, they usually will pick those things up. You reading it or your buyer or seller reading it would probably not pick it up. As Mark said, the one document, because it's not alluded to. But even in the documents themselves, sometimes some of the pages don't get printed, or it's on a back side of a page and they forgot to flip it over. So that can be caught. And if you're reading it or your buyer or seller is reading it, they're not going to catch it. And there have been many a lawsuit because of that one page that the HOA didn't catch. So, and also on a third party, it takes the liability from you to them, because you are paying a third party to review the documents and you're relying on them to give you the correct information.
Exactly. And our E&O insurance carrier reduces by half, cuts your deductible in half if you've got all the reports and a home warranty and, you know, all the possible inspections in the file. They'll cut your deductible in half because they know you've done everything right. And the other thing you got to be aware of on these HOAs, some of them are self-managed. We sold a condo over at the beach in Capitola that was a small group. They have 10 or 12 units, so they were self-managed. So I did the right thing. I had the buyer. I went to Jackie Berry. She opened it up, and it was just a complete can of worms. They were self-managed, and they were behind on everything. HOAs are required to file paperwork with the state. They hadn't done it in years. They're required to do inspections and fill out reports. They hadn't done it in years. They're required to send out newsletters, have meetings, adhere to all the things in the CC&Rs. They hadn't done any of it, okay? So we ended up closing escrow, and my client got a hell of an education, ended up getting on the board, and then they went ahead and started becoming compliant. But Jackie Berry was able to give them a laundry list of deficiencies that they could start using as a worksheet to become compliant and to begin the process of staying current with state and federal laws regarding nonprofit organizations in HOA.
No, quite.
So there you have it. Any other questions on the HOAs or thoughts you want to share?
Two things. Who do you recommend, the seller or the, I'm assuming maybe loan agent, get the HOA reviews and include in the disclosure? And isn't there a government entity that publishes a list of the docs that the HOA must provide?
Yeah, the state of California has a list of everything that is required of HOAs. Okay, the Department of Real Estate governs most of that, and I think that's probably where you can go to find that list of what's required. And what was the first question again?
Should the seller themselves or the listing agent request the HOA docs to get reviewed? Like who should be responsible for that? The seller themselves or the listing agent?
A buyer and the seller hasn't done it, again, is what, like I said before, it's your duty to protect the buyer in 1 to 4 units of residential real estate. So go ahead and put it on your buyer if the seller hasn't done it. I don't often ask the seller to get that report. I rely on the buyer because at the end of the day, the seller is just going to hand over the package. But does the buyer really understand what's in the package and what it says and what it means? And does the buyer's agent really understand it? Probably not. So get somebody like Jackie Berry if you are the buyer's agent, because the seller fulfills their duty once they hand you the package. They've adhered to the law. They're insulated in terms of disclosure. They've fully disclosed everything they're responsible for. But that doesn't mean the buyer really understands what they're getting into, and the buyer's going to sue the buyer's agent if a problem comes up. It's just a fact. Hope that answers that question.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So we've got a few more minutes here. Let's see how far we can get. We talked about the condos. We talked about HOAs. Condition of the property. There's kind of this urban myth that, the property has to be cleaned, has to be broom swept, yada, yada. Maybe PRDS used to have a line in there. I haven't looked at a PRDS contract in a long time, but I don't see anything in the C.A.R contract that says a seller has to clean a property. What it does say is the property has to be maintained in the same condition as of the date of acceptance of the offer, and all debris and personal property not included the sale shall be removed, maintained in substantially the same condition as of the date of acceptance. So if they clean the house to put it on the market or had it staged or whatever, it's supposed to be in that same condition when the escrow closes. Okay? So if you have any questions about cleaning or not cleaning, you're not going to find it here. What you will find is substantially the same condition as of date of acceptance, and all debris and personal property not included in the sale, which is pretty much everything that's not attached, right? That's got to be removed. So let your buyers and sellers know that that's what they're agreeing to. They're not agreeing to have a professional cleaner come in or it'd be broom swept or anything along those lines. This is what they're agreeing to. Does everybody get that? This is what the agreement says. All right. So if the buyer buys the house in the spring and it's a 30-day escrow with a 30-day rent back, and 60 days later we're in 95-degree heat and that gorgeous green lawn is now dead, we got a problem, don't we? Okay. The seller has to maintain the lawn. If we're in the fall months and you got a beautiful green lawn and then the buyer shows up 60 days, 90 days later, and there's leaves everywhere and all this stuff, and the gardener hasn't picked it up, seller's got a problem. It's not in the condition it was in at date of acceptance. So seller's got to rectify that. Okay. Karen?
Okay. What do you do in the case of, I have a client who I'm going to be listing for them, and it's a bit of a hoarding situation, and they don't want to do anything. So
Okay, that's fine.
everything
Property
stays.
is, wait a minute. Can they sell the property as is, as long as they've defined what as is means?
So they just say whatever you see stays.
Yeah, right here it says the property is sold in as is present physical condition as of the date of acceptance, unless otherwise agreed. So what you're going to need to do is get on board with the listing agent and the buyer and explain to them what you see is what you get. My older client does not want to clean anything. That's part of the illness. They can't throw things away. As long as you can get them out of the house, and this is what my wife and I, we work on a team together. We were buying hoarder houses in the recession, and those things were trashed. They would literally make you retch sometimes because they smelled so bad, or you open the refrigerator and the scent just knocks you over because everything inside it is dead. All right. So just disclose. As long as buyer and seller agree that they're accepting this literal garbage can and they take on the responsibility of cleaning it out and have a cleaning crew come in, there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
And like I said, we bought houses like that on several occasions. Real bad shape, real smelly. But we knew what we were getting into, so it's fair game.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so that's it. Now, investigations. Obviously, most sellers today are getting their properties inspected in advance. But if not, you need to go out and get them inspected. The roof, the chimney, termite, home, pool, okay? Those are the 5 big ones. And then if they call out anything significant, then you get your foundation guy in there, you get your electrician or your plumber in there to give you specific direction on a specific issue that was called out in those reports. Okay, so that's what this is all about. Buyer has a duty to investigate. It's not a suggestion, it's really a command. You know, you as the buyer's agent are commanding either the buyer or the seller to provide an inspection report, or we shouldn't be moving ahead unless in certain cases, you know, when I represent builders, sometimes they don't care. They can fix anything. They know they're buying a really bad house, they're going to tear it down anyway, you know, whatever. And there are some exceptions, but most of the time, get everything inspected.
I got a question in here.
Yes,
If you're doing a rent back, do you have the right to do a walkthrough at the close of escrow so that you can see what the condition is that day, and then do another walkthrough as soon as there's a vacancy to make sure that nothing happened in whatever that buyback time, rent back time was?
Yes, absolutely. The purchase agreement gives you, as you, those of you that have read it, gives you the option to do a visual inspection, verification of condition of property, the VIP form. You verify the condition of the property prior to close of escrow, on the day of close of escrow, you know, even after close of escrow. You know, the contract doesn't stipulate when you do it, but you have that right as a buyer to do it. Be careful, advise your buyers that that is not a contingency. So if you do it prior to close of escrow and you see that the seller rather didn't keep the property in the condition it was on the date of acceptance, under all the laws that have already, and lawsuits that have already occurred, the right thing for the buyer to do is close escrow and then go back after the seller, because the contract survives the close of escrow. Does everybody understand that? The contract and all the agreements that the buyer and seller made don't suddenly stop on the date of close of escrow. Certain things stop, but if any of the agreements were not properly fulfilled, the buyer or the seller still has that responsibility after close of escrow to do whatever they agreed to do in the contract. Okay, so close the escrow and then go back. Now, in this case, the seller's going to stay in the property, right? So do your walkthrough, fill out the VIP form with your buyer, check the condition, and then after that, now your buyer is literally a landlord. So you'll see in the RLAS and the SIP, they have landlord rights. With 24-hour notice, they can go and inspect the property, you know, I wouldn't say as often as they want, but they can make reasonable inspections of the property during the rent back period. They now have landlord rights. And with proper notice, they get to go in the property, they get a set of keys and so on, okay? So yeah, they can do several inspections during the SIP period, the rent back period. But it's a different type of inspection. The inspection prior to close or in concurrence with your escrow, that's a visual inspection, the VIP. Okay, that's to make sure the property is in the same condition it was as date of acceptance, and that everything that the seller agreed to do has been done. If there were any repairs to be done, you're verifying that everything's still there, that it's supposed to remain with the property, and do that. After the fact, now you're a landlord. Now there's a deposit on the line. So did the seller trash the place? You as a landlord can take money for that. Did the movers break anything? You can withhold money to make repairs to the door jamb or the broken window or whatever it might be, okay? So it's a different type of inspection, but the answer is yes, you can do multiple inspections. It's just a different type once the escrow closes. Now you're a landlord doing a landlord inspection from there on after. Okay, I hope I didn't beat that one to death, but that's come up recently too. As my job as risk manager here at our office, I see all the goofy stuff that hits the fan. So, you know, I've got tons of experience. Fortunately, it's not all my personal experience, someone else's issues. Okay, any other questions? I think we've got about 4 minutes left. Why don't we circle back? I'll stop here at title investing. this is a really good opportunity, this title investing, for you to sit down with your escrow officer, if you can get them to sit down and take a lunch. There, not too many of them do that, but take them out for a drink, take them out for lunch. You're not doing them a favor by, and they're not doing you a favor when they answer your questions. You're bringing them business, okay? You're bringing their company $2,000, $3,000 every time you do an escrow with them, and even more. You know, it depends on the purchase price of the house, what the fees are. But there's a few $1,000s every time you do an escrow. So they owe you a little bit of their time to explain what they do, to explain what title insurance really is, and to explain to you how to read a prelim to the degree that you should be able to read it as a licensed professional real estate agent. Okay, so get with your, read this paragraph carefully, and then sit down with your escrow officer and say, I'm going to bring you some business, if you don't already bring them business, and pick their brain for 30 minutes or whatever time they can give you. But that's a real good conversation. And do the same thing with your loan officers, okay? You're bringing them a lot of money when you know, they're doing a $900 million loan, et cetera. You know, that's a pretty good commission for them. The least they can do is explain their job to you and how it works if you haven't already had that conversation. So that's all I want to say on that. Let's go back and answer any last minute questions that may have come up on any of the previous forms or previous paragraphs in the purchase agreement. Any hands?
I don't see any hands and I don't see any questions. I feel like there could be a part 2 to this. So maybe Mark we'll schedule a part 2.
Yeah, maybe we'll continue from, you know, the title on that, or go back and take a deeper dive into certain things. But
Yeah.
really, I really want to emphasize that, you know, this is a team effort. The lenders on the team, the title companies on the team, the brokers on the team, your mentors on the team, all your service providers, your home inspectors. You know, go out on a bunch of home inspections. Don't hesitate to ask these guys questions. A lot of them love to talk because they're basically isolated in a lot of these inspections. They don't get to really talk to anybody, especially during COVID. And, you know, they're a wealth of information that makes you better prepared to do your job and makes your life a lot easier. And let me just leave you with, again, the request that you read the contract every day for a month. And in doing so, you're going to be able to answer 99% of the questions that your clients have, because everything's really answered here, at least as far as the escrow and what are we doing and what are buyer and seller obligated to do and who's paying for what. That's all spelled out here in the purchase agreement. So really study that thing. You'll thank yourself. Okay, that's it for me,
Awesome.
guys.
And I do have the recording, so I will share it with everybody at the end of the class. Actually, it'll give me a couple days.